For our next settlement we will be diving into, we will be looking at Karkolohk, the goblin fortress located in the spine of the world. The goblins of the north are holed up here, and we'll be getting into what they've been doing and how you can incorporate them into your campaign. Karkolohk, found a whopping near 30 miles away from the closest bit of civilization. You can see why the goblins are located so far away, because one, they obviously get into fights with civilization all the time, but two, them being further away from civilization allows them to hit the 10 trails a lot easier. And we'll be getting into basically the goblins used to attack the 10 trails all the time. They used to basically just ransack them and eat the people and eat their food and steal their supplies and whatever else. But the problem is, in the past couple of years, there hasn't been much travel along the 10 trails because the place has been snowed over. So the goblins are holed up in this fortress in the north, and they really can't be doing too much. So unfortunately for them, that's led to a little bit of infighting, as well as it's led to a possible change in leadership. And their leadership is a little bit strange because several years ago, a gnome found their way into their camp. And this gnome dressed himself up as a goblin and has for years now been in control of the goblin camp. But if he doesn't turn things around real quick, he is going to find himself in a world of pain and probably death. So how do we get your players to tackle Karkolohk? Let's go ahead and dive into the tall tales in the quest. For the tall tales of the towns, we get goblin scavengers prowl the tundra on the backs of wolves or in wagons. They also like to ambush travelers on the 10 trail on this side of the mountain pass. Well, a group of trappers found the goblin fortress in the mountains. Someone should go there and wreck it. This is going to, direct players that are more adventurous and willing to go on next to no information. However, I'm willing to bet that even those people are going to go ahead and ask around specifically for these individual trappers. Hey, what did you see? What were the numbers like? Etc., etc. And to that degree, if you are willing to allow it, then you should have your players be able to find these trappers that found this goblin fortress, and they should give a rough, estimate of what's going on there. And you can actually show them the awesome image of the map. So this is what I'm referring to. The trappers could go ahead and say, oh yeah, we saw these skulls on pikes, and we saw that there was these spires, and we saw some fires off in the distance. We obviously didn't get too close though, but we saw that there was a couple of watchtowers and some goblins manning them, and then we backed off. You can totally give that awesome description and obviously paint the image of what your players are going to be possibly going up against. For a quest that can take us to Karkolohk, we have Peace Out. Recently, a goblin messenger was captured by the town of Brynchander, and the goblin was carrying a peace missive in from the goblin camp and is addressed to the speaker Duvessa Shane. Yarb Nock, who is the leader of the goblins, or at least that's their pseudonym, is sending this delegation to try and conduct a peace treaty because the goblins are starving, and if they don't get any help, then they're in for trouble. Sheriff Markham Southwell isn't buying any of this, so he's going to go ahead and say, hey, you guys, can you go up there and actually go ahead and do the talking, and we'll offer you 300 gold for the chieftain's head. And what's interesting here is it does specifically state that we're given two options. Either one, this peace treaty was totally legit, and the goblins are willing to go ahead and broker this peace treaty, in which case they can go on in and start talking. Or it can just be an elaborate ploy to lure adventurers inside to kill them and then steal all their loot and eat them. And that is left up to your discretion. This quest is probably more likely to get people to actually come to Karkolohk, but there is obviously way more ways we can go ahead and get our players into the goblin camp. So first off, your players could have already had an interaction with the goblins before with the Foaming Mugs quest. The goblins had a wagon and they were stealing supplies and they were trying to bring it back to Karkolohk. Your players could have interrogated the goblins, or they could have followed the goblins and would have led them to Karkolohk. And depending on how they handled those goblins before, then that'll obviously influence how your players will interact with the denizens of Karkolohk. If your players straight up murdered all of them, but one of them got away and was able to tell the tale, then they'll be saying, hey, those guys murdered a whole bunch of us, screw them. But if your players actually negotiated and maybe even talked it out and stuff, then maybe those goblins are going to say, hey, they didn't kill us, maybe we can go ahead and hear them out. And always keep in mind that past actions have future consequences. Another reason why your players could be coming to Karkolohk is because they found the lost spire of Netheril and found a Shield Guardian's amulet. Because in every single 5th edition module, there's an obligatory Shield Guardian. The thing is, though, is your players had to have already been to the Lost Spire, and they had to have already gotten the Shield Guardian's amulet. But if they get that, it is going to lead them here, and that is going to obviously be a pretty awesome reward if they are able to go ahead and retrieve the Shield Guardian found here. We, of course, could have a few more reasons why we would be showing up here. And in fact, actually, one of them we can tie to the Id Ascendant. The Id Ascendant, when it was crashing down, had to jettison some cargo. One thing that happened was one of the cargo that was jettisoned found its way to Karkolohk. If your players have already been to the Id Ascendant, then maybe the gnome Ceramorphs there can direct the players to this area to go ahead and retrieve their cargo. However, they're probably going to forget to mention how dangerous this cargo is, but we'll be getting to that once we arrive at that location. And lastly, if you just want to give your players a good old hack and slash and mood, then you can just go ahead and say that the goblins recently attacked a caravan headed out of Brynchander, and they stole all the supplies, and these supplies are needed to survive, and thus you are tasked with going out there and getting them. And you can just go ahead and direct your players there, and they hack their way through the goblins and get all the supplies needed. All of these tie-ins are great. You can have it be political, you can have it be combative, you can have it be, just all these various things, and it's fantastic. I like that the goblins can actually be played not as just straight up kill on sight. They can obviously have some role-playing and other elements involved with them. So as previously stated, their leader is not who he seems. The secret behind Chief Yarb is that 5 years ago, a caravan was attacked, and a gnome was able to slip amongst their ranks. His name is Spellix Romwad, and he was able to put on this outfit and cast some minor illusions and make himself appear to be a goblin. But the thing about it is that he was clearly smarter than everyone else and was able to earn his way into being the leader of this tribe, and he was able to direct them into doing the smartest things possible, creating this fortress, earning a whole bunch of food and resources. But, like I said, because 2 years ago the everlasting winter started, times have been tough. And because of that, there's been a lot of discourse in the fortress, and he is teetering on the edge of being able to survive, because the goblins, if they find out who he is, or if they just straight up don't like his leadership tactics anymore, they're going to go ahead and kill him. So because of this shift in dynamic, the gnome might wise up and say, hey, I got to get out of here, this is way too much for me. In which case you go ahead and introduce the fact that the gnome wants this peace treaty. And this peace treaty could be just a way to appease the goblins, or it could also be a way for the gnome to go ahead and make his great escape and get out of the settlement and go back to civilization. If you play this gnome as he wants to make his way back to civilization, then he's going to go ahead and try and sneak away with the party. But if you just play him as being opportunistic, then go ahead and play him as devious as he is. This is entirely up to you. The book basically gives you these two options, but of course you can play it any number of ways. This is D&D after all. You can do whatever the frick you want. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the locations here and see what we are working with. In Area 1, we have the Watchtowers, as previously shown on that little map there, which you can go ahead and show your players once they're arriving to this location. There's 3 Watchtowers that overlook this place, and you'll be able to see them from pretty far away. In fact, it states that you can see this place from a mile away because of how big it is. But the Watchtowers in particular are all manned by 4 goblins each, and they should be on duty and attentive. However, they don't really care because 1, they probably never get attacked, and 2, most important of all, they're cold. So they're going to go ahead and just be standing next to the braziers and try not to freeze to death. So on the map here, as your players arrive, they will be coming from specifically this location up here, in which case they'll have to go all the way down past 1 watchtower here, 1 watchtower there. And that might look like a watchtower, but we'll be getting into Area 4 in a moment. But the 3rd watchtower is actually located to the side here. It's overlooking the cliff, which is a very odd place to have a watchtower. They might suspect that there is some creatures that can go ahead and scale the cliffs. But we'll be getting into later that the cliffside is pretty friggin' steep and pretty far. It's in fact a 140-foot drop from around here. So More often than not, nothing's going to be coming around here, but there certainly could be some devious creatures that could scale these cliffs. If your players are coming in here just to wreck shop and kill goblins, and they see these watchtowers, then they're probably going to have to do something creative here in order to wipe out the goblins all in the watchtower at the same time, in which case you'll go ahead and probably prompt them to make some stealth rolls, and thankfully, because they're so inattentive, all you need is a simple DC 9 stealth check, and if the party's doing it, then go ahead and make it a DC 9 group stealth check. In each of the towers, there's these 4 goblins, and one of them will always have a horn, and that horn, if it is blown, will sound the alarm and put the entire fortress on alert. So if your players are perceptive enough, they'll be able to see that, oh, hey, there's one in particular that has the horn. Let's go ahead and snipe him first and make sure that nothing bad happens. Not to go too far deep into mechanics, but if you want your players to go ahead and knock out the towers, then go ahead and give them the air quote surprise round, which means that everyone rolls initiative, and as long as you go before the goblins, then you get advantage on your attack rolls, and for that first round, the goblins get to do absolutely nothing. Mind you, though, this is only if your players are approaching with the intent to kill all these goblins. What happens if they're coming here with the guise of peace? Then they'll just go ahead and start walking in here, and the goblins will be on alert and make sure nothing funny happens, and they'll just be able to walk past all these towers and go their merry way through the gate. In Area 2, we have the main gate, and it's here that 6 goblins are going to be perched up on top and trying to stave off the cold as well. And once again, these guys are also unattentive. They really don't care because presumably not many people attack. So once again, it's just another DC 9 stealth check to try and sneak past here, presumably hugging the walls or, trying to make sure that they huddle in the snow or whatever. And once they make their way to the gate, they'll be able to see that this thing is pretty sturdy. There is a padlock in here, and it requires a DC 20 dexterity check in order to make their way through it. But the gate is actually large enough that a small character can squeeze underneath with a DC 20 acrobatics check. The thing about this, though, is if you are coming in here with the intent of combat, then unfortunately, if your players don't have the thieves' tools necessary, they don't have small people or whatever, then what it sounds like is you can theoretically get soft locked out of being able to come here. So I would go ahead and start thinking about ways your players will go ahead and tackle this area. Should they be able to scale the walls? Should they be able to break the door down with, just brute force or with magic? Are they going to be able to scale the mountain close by and then hop on in? You got to be prepared for these things because your players are going to be absolutely wily and crazy, and they're probably not going to only adhere to only using thieves' tools or trying to squeeze someone small underneath. In Area 3, we have the Courtyard, and this is once your players make their way inside, it will be able to see all of the pathways that go left and right. They have these walkways above, and of course they have cages all over. And these cages are actually filled with humanoids that the goblins capture and freeze to death before they eat them. Gross. The cages on the ground are for the polar bears that pull wagons, and there is a warg here who is being run by a snub suck. It's kind of comical here. It states that if combat arises, then the warg is going to jump in at the party, but Snubsuck is going to comically fall off and start running away because he's a coward. Another reason why this guy is special is because he is holding a key to Area 5, the main gate, and it's dangling from his left wrist. So hopefully your players are able to catch up to this guy and get the key before he runs away. Area 4, the archer platforms. As previously stated, there's multiple Area 4s here. And all they are just simply goblins that are manning the place armed with short bows, and they'll go ahead and shoot on anybody that they can see. And there's also wolves stationed atop there as well, presumably as guiding dogs or whatever. Something you should probably incorporate, though, is the fact that these guys can't shoot everywhere, right? They are higher up, and thus, for some locations, it's going to be harder to shoot. So maybe you should make it so that if they are in the defilade of the watchtowers, meaning that they're directly underneath them, the goblins can't lean over and shoot down. Basically, there has to be an arc in which they can be able to shoot at, and if you get too close, then the goblins in that specific watchtower cannot shoot. Area 5, the main battle platform. This is a 30-foot tower that rises up and is obviously the main battle platform and is super well defended if there's a whole bunch of goblin archers on top of it. And what's interesting here is this is where your players will be able to find the Shield Guardian. Basically, it goes into a description here that there is a creature here, but your players will know that it's a construct, and it's being held up like a puppet. And this 9-foot tall golem-like construct with a helm-shaped head, the humanoid contraption is attached to an arrangement of ropes and pulleys that make it look like a giant marionette. So if your players come here and they don't have the Shield Guardian amulet, they're going to go ahead and see this construct and not be able to do anything with it, sadly. But if they do have the Shield Guardian amulet, then they will finally be able to use that bad boy once they get within 10 feet of the creature and have themselves an awesome companion. We get some good info here on the Shield Guardian itself. Basically, this thing was created some 2,000 years ago and was owned by a Netherese wizard. And that Netherese wizard is in fact actually still located at the Lost Spire of Netheril. However, he's obviously totally dead. The Shield Guardian actually crashed with the Lost Spire of Netheril, but after some time it basically crawled out of there and just started moving around the place. Eventually it just shut down, and the goblins found it a couple of years ago and decided to string the thing up and, make it look scary. However, it kind of lost its, scary shine after a bit. Area 6, we have the Healer's Huts, and it's here where your players will be able to possibly interact with the goblin healers. Basically, these goblins have healer's kits and they know how to use them. In addition, they also have mountain goats, which they draw their milk from and also use them as mounts. There's a little bit of shamanism going on here. There is a goblin named Manafik, and she is actually able to portend some things. She studies patterns by raven's blood spilled on the snow, and she actually knows that the goblin leader, Chief Yarb, is in disguise. But the thing is, though, is that she hasn't come up with what to do yet. She doesn't know if she's going to expose him or if she's going to blackmail him. She's leaning more toward blackmailing him because, as of right this second, she doesn't think that she would be elected the leader if she exposed him. So that's totally something you can play up. If your players start sneaking around this area and interacting with all the locals, then you can definitely have that political intrigue of trying to make Manafik the leader, or, exposing the goblin leader with this newfound information. There's a lot of fun things you can do with that. Area 7, the Walk of Doom. Basically, the goblins every once in a while have to throw some subordinates off of this cliff for insubordination. And unfortunately, it's a terrible thing because when they're prodding someone to this cliff, they've got two options. Either one, they jump, or two, they try and run, but they obviously get cut down. This thing is shoddily constructed, and if anybody is dumb enough to try and leer over this thing, if they weigh more than 200 pounds, then the thing snaps and they have to make a dexterity saving throw, DC of 16. On a success, they are able to hop back to the snow no problem. But on a failure, they plunge into the depths below and fall a whopping 150 feet, taking 15d6 damage, and are presumably super duper far away from the party and are going to have an incredibly terrible time getting their way back to the party. If you do have someone that's dumb enough to go ahead and get themselves felled down here but somehow survives the fall, then I would say go ahead and make it like a DC 20 athletics check to try and scale the cliff with their bare hands. Make the DC a lot easier if they have climbing kit, and, and maybe if you really want to kill this person for their stupidity, maybe there's some monster, picking off all of the bones of all the goblins that have fell down there, and they can meet a grisly end. Area 8, the Goblin Huts. The goblins actually have built their huts above the rest of the walkway, and in fact, you cannot actually walk to the Goblin Huts. The only way you can get there is by climbing up a rope from these individual huts, or by going and just scaling it with your bare hands. Each hut is 15 to 20 feet above the wooden planks around, and of course there's a whole bunch of goblin children inside. Awesome stuff. If your players feel the need to go ahead and ransack these huts, they'll have to make a DC 15 athletics check to go ahead and scale the place. So whenever your players are going murder hobo spree on any indigenous creatures, then you should always introduce the fact that there's children. Because, man, if you have a group that feels like they're full of justice and virtue, and then all of a sudden they see kids running around, and one of the goblins dies, and then a goblin little kid says, "Daddy?" You're going to have some players that are going to be like, ooh, Ooh, man, are we the baddies? And, that's just a good way to keep your players in line. If you just have a group of murder hobos and they don't care, then, I guess that's your game, whatever. But hopefully you have groups that are not willing to do horrible things in front of kids. In Area 9, we have the main keep Foyer, and what it states here is that there's 4 goblins stationed here, and if any combat arises, then basically the horn is raised, then the goblins are going to go ahead and slam a wooden crossbar against the doors, and it states that a ram or a similar siege weapon is needed to break down the barred door. More often than not, most people don't carry a siege weapon or a ram on their person, so if you really want to go ahead and just say, hey, you can't get in here, then I would go ahead and at least come up with something that they can do, potentially try and, bust the door down, break it down, burn it down, whatever the case may be. But just telling them, oh, you can't make it through, then they're probably going to be a little peeved. But, of course, there is another way that they can get into this location. In Area 10, we have the guard barracks, and there are these 3 little rooms here which have net, which is being used as hammocks. And it just simply states that no goblins sleeping there as of this current time. But the thing is, though, is if it is a barracks, then presumably the goblins spend a decent amount of time here, and you should play that up. You should say that, oh, there's some things laying about, maybe there's some graffiti on the wall, maybe the place is a little bit ramshackle. You just make it play up as, being actually lived in. In Area 11, we have the dining room, and this is where your players are going to go ahead and sit down and have a meal if they actually came here to negotiate a peace treaty. This can be an absolutely fun role-playing encounter where your players are interacting with someone who's clearly not a goblin, but the goblins are unawares of it, and Spellix is going to go ahead and try and say, hey, bust me out of here, or hey, let's go ahead and have some peace and stuff. And your players are probably going to have a lot of questions, and you're going to have those answers prepared. But we'll be getting into role-playing the chief in a little bit. But needless to say, if your players come in here and is not under the peace treaty negotiations, then there's just going to be a lone goblin sat here, and he as well is going to put down a wooden crossbar if there is an alarm raised. However, this thing is actually able to be broken into with a DC 22 athletics check. In Area 12, we have Chief Yarb's quarters. It states here that the door to the room has 3 deadbolts, and the reason for that is because the chief, he's just a gnome. He doesn't dress up as a goblin all day, every day. That'd probably get annoying real quick. So when he's in this room, he goes ahead and doffs all this stuff. But eventually, if someone tries knocking on the door, he'll go ahead and start speaking some goblin, and he'll try and delay as he's trying to put on all of these clothing. If your players are rushing in here, then they only need a DC 15 athletics check to go ahead and bust down the door, in which case they'll go ahead and find the chief in whatever state he is, whether he is wearing all of his goblin clothes or not. If your players come in here and they find the gnome putting on some goblin clothes, they're probably going to have a lot of questions, in which case you can go ahead and do the whole spiel about what's going on. But if they find him purely as a goblin, once again, they're probably going to have some questions because he's clearly not a goblin. But keep all of that information in mind. The thing that's interesting about this room, though, is the fact that they will be able to find the egg-shaped crate, and that is from the Id Ascendant. And this thing is huge. It's 3.5 foot tall and 3 foot wide, and it stands upright. If your players were prompted to come here trying to find this thing, then they might have a little bit more information about it, but not too much. But what they're going to find is that this thing, it looks smooth, but its surface feels tacky. It weighs 250 pounds and has a panel of flashing lights below its bulging midsection. The panel is a 9-digit keypad locking mechanism, and each glowing button has a braille-like bumps on it. Spellix has been unable to remove the keypad or crack open the crate, so he has been trying different combinations of the lock. This thing requires an 8-digit combination in order to open, or if someone casts a knock spell, they can go ahead and open it. So, if you do the really quick math on this, then what you'll be able to find is, with 9 digits, trying to suss out an 8-digit code, there is a 1 in millions chance, possibly even billions, I have to do the actual math on it, in order to get the right combination of numbers. So it's way more than likely that the players are not going to be able to get it. But I'm willing to bet that there's some groups out there that are going to say, no, we're going to figure this out. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, and etc., etc. If you have one of those groups that does that, I say go ahead and let them, and maybe have them just roll a D100, and then only on a nat 100 do they actually get this container to open. Or you could say that if they are seriously going to do this meticulously, it's going to take a tremendous amount of time. I would probably say trying to put in every single combination of this code would probably take at least a month, if not more. Probably a lot more than that, because 8 digits is a whole lot. So time will be a serious issue if they're trying to actually open this thing. What's more than likely going to happen is your players are going to go ahead and say, hey, we want to get this thing open. Let's go ahead and either one, bring it back to the It Ascendant, or two, if they don't know about the It Ascendant, then they can go ahead and bring it back to the 10 towns and get someone to cast the knock spell on it. However, getting someone to open up this thing is not exactly the best, because located inside is not cool stuff. It is sadly a gibbering mouther, which is going to go ahead and sprout out and go ahead and attack everyone nearby. So it is a ton of work for absolutely no reward at all whatsoever, which I always find hilarious. But of course, you have to spread out your rewards and your punishments accordingly. And unfortunately, this is a lot of work for absolutely nothing. So, play with it what you will. If you don't like the idea of your players going through a ton of hard work for literally nothing, I would go ahead and say then put in some item in here as well, or just have it only be the item. Maybe this is one of those magical items that's flavored as something else, but is actually just a, magical item. Maybe you put in some laser pistols in here. Who knows? Heck, maybe you can even have a Psych Crystal in here, and this is one of the areas that your players are able to retrieve one of the Psych Crystals for the It Ascendant. There's a lot of things you can play up with this egg-shaped crate, so go ahead and go wild. And lastly, we have Area 13, the Treasury. This small room is empty. Why do you keep putting areas in this module which has literally a single sentence and has nothing in there? Go ahead and add something in here. Make it at least, it could be a treasury, but go ahead and make it like an arms room at least. Maybe the goblins store their weapons in here. Like, why would there just be an empty room for no reason? In addition to that, the goblins used to constantly attack traders and caravans along the 10 trails, so it would make sense that they built up some type of hoard of something. Maybe they don't take all of the gold, but maybe they have some interesting doodads and trinkets in here. It could just be a funny little hat rack for all I know. It could be they put up a whole bunch of trinkets they find interesting and clever. It could be something, but don't leave it to be nothing, because nothing is just no fun. So now that we've gone through all the areas, let's go ahead and take a look on how your players might approach this thing. If your players come here under the prompt of see a goblin, kill a goblin, then it's going to be pretty traditional stuff. Your players are just going to go in here and they could go grognard and just hacking and slashing away. They could be trying to do this assault very stealthily and assassinate the goblins. They could come in here and just start popping off AoE spells left, right, and center. If the goblins are getting bushwhacked, then unfortunately for them, they don't really have anywhere to really run. Your players are coming from the one location that leads out of Karkolohk, and this is sort of a design flaw of the fortress itself, is that theoretically, your players could go ahead and siege out the goblins. They could go ahead and build their own Hadrian's Wall just up here, and make it so that the goblins have no way to pass the location. So your players come in here and they just start hacking and slashing. And not just the men, but the women and the children too. And you can play up that meme, of course. And they just, hack their way through easy peasy. And if that happens, then the chief is going to be hearing this destruction all over the place. He's going to go ahead and just take off his goblin clothes. And once the players that finally arrive, he's going to say, hey, I'm a gnome, don't kill me. And it's going to be as simple as that. He might go ahead and say that he was captured. He'll go ahead and say that he's been trying to survive all this time. And he is a pathological liar, is what you can gather from the information here. So you should totally head and play that up and have him spout anything he can to try and get his way out of here alive. But that is, of course, if your players hack and slash their way through. What do you do if your players come here under the guise of peace? Then your players are going to simply walk on through. The goblins are going to be shifty-eyed and looking and make sure that no funny business happens. They're going to be led all the way up to the dining hall, and there it's where they're going to be able to speak to the chief himself. And the chief is going to say, hey, I want this peace treaty. Let's do this. But you go ahead and decide how you want to play the chief here. Is the chief just luring people in here so that they can eat them and take all of their loot? Or is the chief going to go ahead and say, man, I need to get out of here? At which point the chief is going to go ahead and start showing some hints of that he is not who he says he is. And he is also going to go ahead and slip them a note saying, hey, get me out of here. Regardless of what the chief says, if the players try and take the chief out of here, the goblins are going to perceive that as them trying to kidnap him, whether he's, just walking with them or not. In which case, the goblins are going to go ahead and try and defend their chief. Spellix is not going to go ahead and try and defend himself or kill any of the goblins. He's going to go ahead and let it slide because either one, the goblins kill the adventurers and, he gets some extra stuff, easy peasy. Or the adventurers kill the goblins, in which case he gets to get out of here scot-free. It's kind of a win-win for him here. But of course, there is the alternative option where your players gather some information, and once they find out that the chief isn't who he says he is, then the players can go ahead and turn the goblins on the chief, in which case chaos will ensue because the chief is going to go ahead and try and defend himself. He'll go ahead and cast off some of his spells, which he's not that terrible of a spellcaster really. He does have Chromatic Orb, he's got Shield, he's got Crown of Madness, he's got Firebolt and Shocking Grasp. He'll be able to down a couple of the goblins, no problem, and, he's got a decent-sized health pool of 33. So he'll be able to defend himself alright, but presumably not enough. Presumably, if enough goblins go ahead and shank this guy, he'll go down, in which case there'll be new leadership in tow. Sadly, we don't get any information on what happens to the goblins if Spellix is taken. We don't understand their command structure, and we don't understand who's going to take over and what they do afterward. Presumably, they're probably going to just keep on doing what they're doing. They're probably going to just go ahead and try and steal any materials that they can find outside. But if they lose their intelligent leader, they're probably going to be doing so a lot worse. So if your players either 1, get Spellix killed, or 2, they pull Spellix out and the goblins are still alive, then you should totally play that up that the goblins get a little bit more aggressive in their actions, but are presumably going to get themselves killed a lot more often, trying to attack caravans near the town, or maybe even trying to attack one of the nearby towns itself. There is a lot of fun actions and a lot of fun consequences because of this quest, and I like this area, except for one glaring note. Your players are going to literally be assaulting a fortress with dozens of goblins all about. And realistically, you look around, there is no rewards here. There isn't a single drop of gold. There isn't any items. There is nothing. The only material thing your players will be able to get out of this location is the Shield Guardian. But if your players don't even know what the Shield Guardian is and don't have the Shield Amulet, then unfortunately it's going to be all for naught. So go ahead and add some rewards in here. Add some gold to the treasury. Add some magical items to either the treasury or that egg-shaped crate. Do something, because it would really suck for your players to do a lot of hard work and potentially get players killed because, dozens of goblins attacking, that is deadly. That would really suck for them to go through all this hard work and get absolutely nothing for it. So just keep in mind all of the factors of what happens with the goblins, whether they're all slain or whether, some escape or whatever. Always keep that in mind. And lastly, what happens with Spellix if you decide to bring him back to the 10 towns? What does he get up to? This guy is a pathological liar. He is somewhat powerful. He has, second level spell casting. What does he get up to once he comes back to the 10 towns? Does he try to just integrate into society again? Does he try and do something in particular? Does he influence the campaign at all after you introduce him? Does he do something in the 10 towns? Does he go ahead and start up his own little cult and tries to be the leader again? Who knows? This guy is clearly intelligent. He's got, 15 intelligence, not bad. But also, he's very charismatic. He's able to get away with a lot of things that a lot of people wouldn't be able to get away with. So you should totally play that up. If he comes back to the 10 towns, maybe he tries to weasel his way into the town speakership, or maybe he tries to weasel his way into any large group and try to become its own leader. I like Karkolohk, but of course this can be played in a lot of different ways depending on how your group interacts with this area, and most important of all, how you introduce this quest in the first place. So keep in mind all these factors, and I'm sure this place will work out fantastically for you.